In his youth, listen to this, he attended the preparatory division of the Juilliard School and continues to play the piano for pleasure. As an undergraduate at Cornell University, he learned to play the chimes, which is a small carillon. The distinction between chimes and carillon is 23 bells or less is chimes, more than 23 bells is the carillon. I just learned that a minute ago. And that is the oldest, that's Cornell University's oldest musical tradition, and one of the most frequently played set of bells by any American college campus. He continues to submit musical arrangements of classical and popular music for his alma mater. Today, George will talk about appreciating music, which is basically understanding how differing emotions are captured and exemplified by music. He will illustrate his talk by playing excerpts from Schubert, Wagner, Rossini, and Brahms. He will also discuss the role of the performer's interpretation of music, the physics of musical sounds, and the neurobiology of hearing music. I'm sure we're in for a treat this morning. Please join me in extending a warm DMA welcome to George Ubogy.
Thank you. Can the people in the back row hear me? If you can hear me, please raise your hand.
Steve, can we turn up the sound?
It's up.
They indicated it's adequate. Usually the speakers that I'm used to say, if you can't hear me, raise your hand. That never made much sense. So, as I'm talking to you, or the air conditioning is going on, what you're hearing is noise. And noise, my voice or the air conditioning, is a series of sound waves that are mixed in frequency. When the sound wave that you're hearing is not mixed, if it's a pure frequency of whatever the number is, that's a musical tone. So if the number of vibrations per second is 256 per second, that's middle C. And if it's 440, it's the A above middle C, the note to which orchestras tune up. As it turns out, I didn't test this piano, but I'm going to see whether the microphone will project the sound. You have a, let's say, 440 A. So the string or column there or what have you is vibrating at 440 times per second. Simultaneously, it's vibrating at 880 and 1660. It's vibrating at 880 in halves and at 1660 in quarters. And a number of multiples, not just doubles and quadruples, but triples, quintuples, etc. These are faintly audible as what's called overtones or harmonics. You're barely aware of them, but they add to the richness of a tone. If the harmonics are strong and they clash with the next note, you've got a little bit of dissonance there. So what I'm going to do as an experiment is I'm going to push down the note of middle C. That raises the damper. So this string is now free to vibrate. And I'm going to strike not middle C, but notes an octave below it to see whether or not I can get the C to vibrate sympathetically. It's very faint, isn't it? And last night, I always assumed that the harmonics or overtones only go upstream, because the string is vibrating in halves or quarters or quintuples. Actually, it goes downstream as well, I discovered last night on my piano. So I'm going to open up the strings of the C's below and strike middle C sharply. And I'll see if I can produce the note. You hear that?
Right.
Now, the damper has come down, and it cuts it off, the felt pamphlet. But if I release it, you can hear things. So what that taught me is that if I strike it underneath, it's causing the C up here to vibrate. I'm sorry, I wanted to go the other way. So that C is causing the lower C's to vibrate in halves and quarters, and that's what allows this C to sound. Okay, so that's overtones, and a little bit about the physics of sound waves. Fixed number of vibrations per second, and the string or column of air can give off overtones as well. When those vibrations hit the ear, at say 440 times per second, it causes the eardrum or tympanic membrane to vibrate at 440. And that transmits pulsations to the thick liquid inside the ear. So you've got little fluid waves coming down to 440, which stimulates the hairs that project into the ear canal in the inner ear, the cilia, or endocilia, to jerk at 440. And these connect to little nerve cells, which fire at 440. So now we've translated vibrations, sound waves, to electrical stimuli. In the base of the cilia, nerve cells connect with that and flow together to form the auditory nerve, which opens, which goes through a little opening in the skull, the auditory canal, and connects with brain cells inside the brain in this part, which is called the temporal lobe. It's named for the temples: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe. And these send off connections to other parts of the brain, other stimuli for emotional response, memory, etc. And it's been found that people who become senile will still remember songs from their childhood, even after they forget faces of people that they should remember and what they've had for lunch or breakfast that day. Now I'm going to move. Are there any questions about the physics of sound or the neurobiology of sound? It's a pretty superficial view, but I thought it gives you a little basis for understanding what's going on. Now what I'd like to do is talk about and play for you excerpts from pieces of music that I think serve as exemplars of how music conveys emotional state, feeling states. And I'm going to start with Schubert. Schubert was born just about the time Mozart died, within 3 or 5 years, in the same city, in Vienna. And the spirit and style of Mozart and Beethoven were very much part of the musical scene in Vienna in the turn of the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. And Vienna was the musical capital of the world. Schubert, when I sometimes hear Mozart and I can't identify it, it turns out it was Schubert. Schubert started off sounding very similar to Mozart. He adopted all of the stylistic features, and I have difficulty differentiating them. But like Mozart, Schubert matured very early. And by the time he was 16, 17, 18, he was writing in a mature, individual style that's noticeably his. Everyone thinks of Mozart when you consider a musical genius cut short by death at an early age. And indeed, Mozart died by the age of 35. Schubert was dead by 32. He died of syphilis, or its treatment. He was an unattractive man, short, dumpy. The affectionate name for him from his friends was Little Toadstool in German. So he was not a big hit with the ladies, and he went to prostitutes, acquired syphilis, which was a very common event in Europe at that time. And syphilis is a major killer. They treated it with mercury, which had some beneficial effects, but also had its severe detriment effects as well. And he died by 32 of syphilis or mercury poisoning. Nonetheless, again like Mozart, he was extremely prolific, extremely productive in many ways. Piano music, violin music, symphonies, chamber music, opera, a ballet. And one thing that he was unparalleled in was songs. Schubert's Lieder are unique in their number and their quality. Lieder are art songs. And we're going to start off with one called The Earl King. The Earl King is the elf king. Earls are elves. And the elves in Danish, Scandinavian, German mythology are not cute little leprechaun mischievous figures that move your picnic basket from one side of the tree to the other. These are dark, malevolent forces of the forest. And Goethe took the myth of the Earl King, the Elf King, and set it to a poem, which unfortunately I neglected to bring the translation here, but in German, essentially, it's a collection of 4 voices. The narrator, the father, the son, and the Earl King. The narrator starts by saying, "Who rides so late at night with such desperation?" It is the father holding his son in his arms. He keeps him warm. And the child says, "Father, do you see the Earl King following us, wearing cape and crown?" And the father reassures him and says, "Be still, my child. It is fog, tendrils of fog that are giving you that sense." And the Earl King, in an innocent voice also, says to the child, "Come with me. I will give you a wonderful life. There are many beautiful flowers on the beach. My mother will cover you with a cloak of gold." The child says, "And Father, do you not hear what the Earl King is saying to me?" And the father again replies with some rational, naturalistic explanation of the sounds. "Hush, my son, it is the breeze going through the trees." And again, the Earl King has a verse of seduction. After 2 or 3 times more of son, father, Earl King, son, father, Earl King, the Earl King says, "I love your form, your shape. And if you do not come with me willingly, I will use force." The son says, mein Vater, my father, the Earl King is laying hands on me now. The Earl King has done me harm. The father shudders, spurs his horse even faster, holds the child closer, finally reaches the farm, and in his arms, das Kind war tot. The child is dead. At the very end, in the last verse, the piano stops, and with this dramatic backdrop of silence, the singer delivers this last line, das Kind war tot. Schubert gives you the galloping of the horse in triplets. The piano part is not easy, but it's not terribly difficult. On the other hand, the singer has a very difficult role. He has to give you 4 voices within the same song. His natural voice, the baritone, like Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, the late great German baritone, his natural voice is that of the father, and the narrator is close to that. With the son, and with the Earl King, until the last line where it says that then I will use force. Tone is not only in a higher range, it's not only in a tenor range, but the voice is lighter. So this is not a heroic tenor. It's a light, almost like an Irish tenor. And Fischer-Dieskau effortlessly switches from one tone to the other to convey the different roles that he's singing in the same song. A terrific performance on YouTube. You may recognize this next melody I'm going to play. Which is, again, and the composer is Irving Berlin. So, somebody at my alma mater over 100 years ago took this song entirely, note for note, and most of the words, and just changed it from Herald Square and Broadway and 42nd Street to the name of some obscure student from 135 years ago, and one of his popular teachers of the day, and a local bartender of the day, and voila, you've got a collegiate fight song. And even though it's lively as the band marches around and everybody is singing, in my way of thinking, a fight song shouldn't just be lively, it should stir the blood. It should make the blood surging. It should get the athletes, student athletes, performing at the top of their game, and then some. This is, of course, Wagner. This is The Ride of the Valkyries. This music is sufficiently stirring that Steven Spielberg used it as the musical backdrop when the attack helicopters took off and flew and incinerated yet some other village in Vietnam. It's the song of the Valkyries. The Valkyries are sisters of Brunhilde. Brunhilde is a major Wagnerian heroine. And the job description of the Valkyries is to fly down to the battlefield and gather up the bodies of the fallen heroes and transport them to Valhalla. Not the Valhalla next to North White Plains and Briarcliff Manor, but the Valhalla up there in the firmament. With considerations like these, I made a musical arrangement of The Ride of the Valkyries and sent it off to Cornell to be played in the bell tower by the chimes masters up there on the day of the big game. But even though they've played it 43 times in the past decade, either they're picking the wrong day, or it doesn't work very well. Because the one lost football team record has been something like 2-10 for the past half dozen years or so. So not everything works out that way. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. And from out of the past come the thundering hoofbeats of the great horse Silver, the Lone Ranger. And his tone. Hi-yo, Silver. Away. It would have been difficult to grow up in the United States in the 1940s and 1950s and be oblivious of the Lone Ranger and the William Tell Overture. But we've already had heroic music as The Ride of the Valkyries. So I'm not going to repeat the charge of the Swiss Army, which is what you just heard, but take the phonograph arm and move it back a bit. The William Tell Overture. William Tell was regarded by Rossini as his operatic masterpiece. It's seldom performed. It's 4.5 hours in length. And it has some problems with producing it the way Rossini would have liked. But in any event, it is acclaimed as a masterpiece. The overture opens with the breaking of day, dawn. And then, musically speaking, comes a little gust of wind and a little spritz of rain. More gusts, more rain, and soon we're in the middle of a full-blown storm, which Rossini conveys masterfully. Then it reverses, the wind becomes irregular, the rain becomes irregular and stops, and then comes the calm, which is pastoral music, and goes like this. At the end of each phrase, there's a single note, and my concept of it is that that's the last note, the last drop of rain coming off an individual leaf and falling into the pond. message is clear. All is well with the borough. It is the antithesis of the 2016 presidential political campaign, where the message is all is shit in the world, but I will fix it. This section of the overture is actually called Rance des Vaches, and that means Song of the Cows. And Rossini is influenced by the sensibility of the few notes that the shepherds would play on cow horns at the end of the day to summon the cows back from the pastures down so that they can have their overfilled udders milked and relieve their pressure. This music was felt to be, these few notes, not highly musical, but whatever they were, was felt to be so nostalgia-inducing for anyone who was Swiss that it was forbidden to play them at the Vatican. And the reason is that the protectors of the Pope were the Swiss guards, and they did not want to induce homesickness that was so intense that it would provoke desertions. The next emotion that I want to convey is that of tragedy and grief and loss. The music that comes to mind most readily is the Chopin Funeral March. But as effective as it has become such a cliche that it's simultaneously a wonderful piece of music and a parody of itself. And I can easily envision a Bugs Bunny cartoon with the funeral march as the musical backdrop and Bugs making Elmer Fudd's life miserable. Chopin did not compose it as an isolated piece, a standalone piece. It's actually the third movement of a sonata, the tempo of which is marche funèbre. And it is not the only marche funèbre in classical music. For instance, Beethoven, Eroica Symphony, second movement, marche funèbre. But the composer I really want to illustrate grief and loss is Brahms. When Brahms was middle-aged, his mother, to whom he had been very close, died. And within the year, Robert Schumann, who had been Brahms' mentor and also a very close relationship, died as well. Brahms' creative juices dried up. He composed nothing for well over a year, and then resumed composing with a requiem in honor of his mother, which he called a German requiem, ein Deutscher Requiem. It's not called ein Deutscher Requiem because Brahms intended it for Germanic audiences exclusively, but because the text, instead of being in the traditional Latin, as requiems had been, was in the vernacular, which was German for Brahms. But he appreciated its universal qualities and said to the conductor at the Bremen Cathedral, at which the work premiered, I could have called it a mentioned requiem, a human requiem. After 9/11 here, Americans were filled with grief, loss, anger, and anxiety. Within several days, the New York Philharmonic and Leonard Bernstein opened the doors of Avery Fisher Hall for a free concert which featured a German requiem. It's in 7 parts. It doesn't resolve grief, but even though there isn't necessarily catharsis, it does, as it goes on, help the audience accommodate to the grief. This is part 2 of 7 for chorus and orchestra. Brahms is described as composing music that is dense. And there's merit to that perception. He, not being in the classical century, but being in the romantic century of music, uses a lot of sharps and flats. He doesn't stick with the major or minor scale primarily, but uses all the tones, multiple fingers, multiple instruments, many inner voices playing simultaneously. And sometimes you long to say to him, Johannes, if only once in a while you could play some simple, lyrical, melodious piece of music, like, for instance, use it to contradict myself and point out to you that much of what I'm saying is generalizations. And generalizations always have exceptions. But if I gave all the exceptions all the time, we'd be here till Friday. So I just want you to take some of my words with a grain of salt. The last composer I'll mention is John Cage. John Cage is a contemporary American composer. Died only several years ago in the 21st century. And his music is somewhat astringent. It's somewhat dissonant. If any of you go to modern dance recitals, Merce Cunningham often used John Cage as his musical background. He has one sonata for piano called 4 minutes, 33 seconds. The pianist comes out, adjusts the score, adjusts the piano bench, you can vary the height a little bit, and then closes the piano lid for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. He then opens it, turns the page, and closes it for 2 minutes, 27 seconds. And similar for the third and fourth movements. Now, the most common reaction is annoyance and boredom. I needed this minimalist, non-music music. Why didn't I bring the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or bring my iPad or what have you? The less common reaction, and that of Cage himself, is that when you go to a concert, inevitably there's a non-musical background. Coughing, sneezing, honking, the inevitable latecomer, oh, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, a little snatch of conversation a few seats away. And the audience, as best it can, tunes it out so that they can focus on the music in front of them. Cage forces the audience to listen to its own sounds and the air conditioning, the traffic, or what have you. If you come back to a repeat performance a month or two later, the sounds are a little bit different. Different players, different amount of influenza in the room. It's a very interesting concept, and Cage thought that it was one of his most significant pieces that he ever composed. I've been playing music in major and minor keys, so let's talk about keys for a minute. You get the sense that there are octaves that have the same sound but different. And I didn't dwell upon it, but the mathematical relationship is, there is a mathematical relationship. So let's go to A. This is 440 vibrations per second, 880, 1760. 440, 220, 110, 55, 27 and a half. The ear hears it as not the same sound but related. So these are octaves. You're back to A. In the old days, in Greek times, there would be notes between each octave, which were notes of the mode. And the modes had various names. So there is Ionian, Aeolian, Lydian, Mixolydian. This is one. This this is another. Some musicians got together, I guess, at some point in the Italian Renaissance and decided to instead go to abolish the notes and bring the song, the notes together and arbitrarily make the octave into 12 subdivisions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Those are the chromatic notes of the scale. And any scale has 12 subdivisions. So they tempered the notes to do this, and Bach composed a series of preludes and fugues, which he called the well-tempered clavichord, in which he composed for the clavichord compositions in every one using the key. What do I mean by key? The key is home base. If you're in C major, you start off in C and you come back in C, even if the melody and the chords wander afield, that's your bookends, beginning and end. And even when you're in the middle of it, you always have a sense that this is home base. The scales, or the keys, are divided into not 12, but 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you're back to C again, 8. So this is the major scale, and this is the minor scale. The third note determines whether it's major or minor. Major, minor. You can use the other notes, and you do, but these are the staples. The other notes are seasoning. You use the staples more often than you do the seasoning. In the key of C, every note is white on the piano, and the sharps and flats are black. In the key of G, there's one black note. So what determines it is that if you've reduced the 12 notes to 7, these are called whole notes because in between each whole note is a half note. And then the third and fourth note have no black note between them. Therefore, we're in C. Again, at the end of the scale, there's no black note between the B and C. They're adjacent to one another. You translate that ratio or that pattern to any other. 3 and 4 doesn't have any note between it, and 7 and 8 doesn't have any note between it. With any interval, I can harmonize it. That sounds dissonant, but I can go. So I've incorporated those two dissonants to make them consonant with one another. Or the one interval that I can't really make into a consonant is and I can't because they're right next to one another. It's like being in a painting where you have red and a hot orange right next to one another. There's a tension set up. So this musical tension makes for the dissonance. Now that's not to say it can't be done, but you have to know what you're doing, and usually it's the modern or contemporary composers that thrive on dissonance. They throw a lot of dissonance into their works. It's like the Cubists at the beginning of the 20th century not only rejected what their predecessors were doing in art, they invented a new vocabulary, and those were the cues. So it is with contemporary music. They didn't avoid dissonance, they courted it. They originally went right into dissonance, which is fine if you're composing a symphony called The Age of Anxiety, Leonard Bernstein did. But otherwise, it can be a little tough for audiences like myself, sort of weaned on the classical, Baroque, Romantic era, to sit back and enjoy music that's consistently dissonant. And I don't know whether it's that I'm just not used to it, and if I grew up on it, it would sound better to my ears, or whether there's something intrinsically unpleasant or difficult for that interval to sound in the ear. I don't know whether that's intrinsic or not. And I'll be interested to hear your take. Some people think that major key pieces are intrinsically happy and minor key pieces are intrinsically sad. That's not true. For instance, the Ride of the Valkyries was in minor, but it's essentially dramatic. Here's a piece in major, second movement of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, which is contemplative. It's not happy or bright, but it's in a major key. Sorry for the clinkers, I haven't practiced in 60 years. But you can hear that it's tempo and volume and other factors that figure into the effect, not just whether it's in major or minor. So I think that minor keys have been plumbed by Tchaikovsky, for instance, for sad, melancholic, beautiful pieces of music. But it's not, in my view, intrinsic to the minor key. It's what he does with it. I'm going to open up to questions early because there are other things that I can go into, but I would like to hear what you would like me to address. So I'll say this. This is the part of the presentation where the entertainer usually starts sucking up to the audience. You have been a wonderful one. So handsome, so well dressed, so well behaved. I can honestly say that you are the best audience that I have had all day. But in case that sounds sarcastic or cynical, let me say this. Number one, you have been good in that you've chuckled at my attempts at you. And number two, you've allowed me to get away with something that most audiences do. When I play something at the end, and I allow it to linger, and for the tones to just gradually die away, that's a luxury that classical music performers don't usually have. For instance, there's an excellent Hungarian pianist named Andras Schiff, who was interviewed on NPR a couple years ago. And he says that when he plays a masterpiece, like Bach's Goldberg Variations, at the end, his preference would be that the audience would sit for a full minute or two before any applause occurs. But audiences don't tolerate silence. And the reason is that you're concerned that the player, the performer, will interpret that as disapproval or boredom or what have you. So within seconds, and everybody joins in and plays. And breaks the spell. Schiff would prefer that people gradually be transported back to the room where they have been to let the effect wear off. But he doesn't have that luxury, and you've given me that luxury. And I did it not just for to transport you back, but also my excerpts of these pieces of music that I'm playing by ear are so short that if I just, it would really be very truncated. So permitting me to linger with either the sustaining pedal or my fingers on the keys has made the ending a little less abrupt than it otherwise had been. Anyway, I just compliment you on that, that behavior. Oh, and the last thing I'll talk about is clapping. Clapping is tough because our hands, you know, have had 50, 60, 70, 80 years of abuse, so it becomes a little uncomfortable. And the only way you can really show enthusiasm is to clap long and hard. By contrast, European audiences, particularly Northern and Eastern European, do it rhythmically. And they pick up the pace gradually, until eventually they get fast enough that it breaks into the chaotic. And I like that for several reasons. Number one, it's propulsive. It sort of brings you into it. And it conveys the enthusiasm because it's picking up the tempo. Number two, the audience becomes the player. The audience is the percussionist. And number three, it saves on the hands. So at some point today, if you are going to applaud at the end, try yourselves without me conducting. And just somebody to just start it off slow and bring it up gradually and see what it feels like. Okay. And now we're open for Q&A.
Thank you.
All the questions like asking the microphone.
Thank you for coming. This has been informative, appreciative, just wonderful. Question for you. The German leader is something my mother used to sing in Bremen, Germany. When you mentioned that cathedral, it brought her back to my mind. Can you explain a little bit more about how common they were and how popular they were in Europe and in particular in Germany at the time?
Yeah. I'm not highly knowledgeable. I think of Lieder as art songs. They're composed by composers. They're not something that's been present for several hundred years. Musi Ben is a long-standing Germanic folk song composed by Anonymous. So these are songs, and I'm sure they're not limited to Schubert or Germanic composers, but it seems to me that Schubert carried it to heights and to width more than any other composer I can think of. Whether they became truly popular or not, I have no idea. One of the questions I had, I received in Greenwich, Senior Men's Association is called the RMA, a year ago was, well, what about popular songs of the day? And I said, well, it was almost a rhetorical question. The questioner had no enthusiasm for it, and nor did I. But having said that, and giving it some thought and sleeping on it, I must say the creativity of pop songs is not in the snatch of musical phrase that's repeating over and over and over and over again. It's in the lyrics. These guys are good. These are not moon, June, soon, croon, Tin Pan Alley, cliched lyrics. These guys really think through and tell a narrative, a story that's excellent. So I think that even with rappers who do it in verse and have, just a musical backdrop with little attempt at melody, they are very good. And in fact, the Nobel Prize for Literature went to Bob Dylan, for the poetry of his lyrics. So I have to tip my hat to the creativity of the songwriters of the day. They just don't focus on long, beautiful, drawn-out melodies like Jerome Kern or Richard Rodgers. It's a different genre, but they do have their creative element, and I sold them short by not addressing the question seriously.
You're a scientist and you understand the physics of sound and the medical perception of sound. How has that helped you? And are you the exception, or do other professional musicians think the same way?
When I've heard Q&As, or when musicians introduce their work that they're about to perform, I must say that I am repeatedly struck by the articulateness and the thoughtfulness that goes in. These guys and women really get into it in a way that's profound. I don't know that reflects scientific background. I think it just reflects thoughtfulness. For instance, there's a young American pianist named Jeremy Denk, D-E-N-K. And he had an article in the New Yorker magazine about his music teachers. 2 or 3 in particular, and remembering specifics of the performance, what they did, what they taught him, or what have you. It was mind-boggling. I mean, this guy really was so profound about what the teachers had done for him in reflecting on it. You can Google Jeremy Denk. The title of the article is "Every Good Boy Deserves Fun." And it's a mnemonic for E-G-B-D-F. This is the E note. This is G-B-D-F. So it's the lines of the treble clef, of the right hand, of the treble clef. E note, G note, B, D, F. So that's how children are taught to remember E-G-B-D-F. Every good boy deserves fun. And it was an exemplar of how thoughtful these people can be. I'll also say that physicians often play music. There are occasional physicians' orchestras. I think what it was that the parents emphasized education and emphasized music education at the same time during elementary school, junior high school, or what have you. The same drive for education drove the kids into music. And my theory is that every other generation, it goes the opposite way. So if the parents leaned on you when you wanted to be playing softball outside, you're very non-directional for your kids. Then your kids will say, oh, if only my parents had pushed me into learning the piano or violin. So they come down hard on their kids, and so it transmits every other generation.
Reading between your many lines, you've really given us a spectrum of emotion for music. That which is very stirring and emotional, and that music which is not. What makes a musical piece emotional?
as I said, it's not whether it's in major or minor. It's a combination of tempo, volume, these are called dynamics, gradual crescendo, gradual diminuendo. In other words, the composer uses the tools of music to play upon the emotional heartstrings. Those are his tools. What it is about music that actually moves us as much as it does, I'm not clear. I have to think about that some more or read up. I mean, there's a book on music by Oliver Sacks, S-A-C-H-S, the guy who wrote the man who mistook his wife for a hat. He's a neurologist who really gets into what makes the brain tick. But he also likes music or loves music and wrote an entire book, which I have not read, on music. And I'm sure that it addresses this among other items. So I want to defer to people who have given this some thought and have musical abilities to say more about it than I do.
As we get older and our sense of hearing diminishes, which end of the scale goes first and why?
I don't know. You know, it seems to me that I hear often about people who have high frequency hearing loss or what have you. Whether those cells or cilia are more susceptible to damage, I don't know. But your question set me off on something which it's hard for me to hold a thought in my head and start off on some area and then get to it again. So hopefully it'll come back to me.
If you mentioned dissonance in the music, and to me it seems like it's similar to contemporary art. The old classical music, as well as, say, Baroque and early Impressionism, is something you look at, you're familiar with, you notice a tree or you notice the theme of the music, and it relaxes, you can relax, look at it, make some judgment as to the technique and so forth. But the distance of music and the contemporary art is something that the creator has in mind, but it also requires you at times to put your own interpretation on it and your own feeling into it, which is very often uncomfortable to one in the audience.
Right.
I have to be creative and to be different. Could you comment on that, please?
Okay, so I was talking about dissonance before and how it can sometimes put you on edge. I think part of being a contemporary artist in any field is to be innovative. And that doesn't necessarily make it great art, it makes it different art. So when you walk into an art gallery, you may well see something that you've never seen before. And if you read the art magazines, they laud the innovation. I don't think innovation by itself carries the day. It's what you do with it. And so I'm less fulfilled by innovation as the only quality. I mean, I admire it, but then you have to go somewhere in order to move me. Again, it's the issue that I raised before. Is it that I'm just more comfortable with the familiar harmonies and melodies of 19th and 18th and 17th century music and art, or not? The other thing is that, of course, that with art, it's more abstract. So you can't just go into the figurative vocabulary and say, oh, how well Winslow Homer, which you're going to have lectures in this building on, conveyed whatever, you know, the fury of the surf breaking against the rocks of Maine or what have you. If it's completely non-objective or abstract, you're really thrown back on your own without having the comfort of surf and waves and sky and water of Winslow Homer to be able to react to. So it's a less rich vocabulary, and I prefer the older one, but that's a question of taste. There's a Russian proverb which goes, on color and on taste, на вкус и на цвет, товарища, comrades, нет, none. There are no comrades when it comes to color and taste. It's an individual type of decision. Yes.
From your description of the sound and the harmonics, on a piano I can understand how you can get half notes and different harmonics, but how would that relate to, say, a woodwind or a brass?
You're asking about the physics of with the string, it's easy to envision, right? And I used it because it's easy. You're going from where the finger presses it down along the neck of the violin or cello to where the bridge elevates it. So it's vibrating between those 2 points. With a wind instrument, it's vibrating between where the wind enters the instrument and where it comes out, the valve that has been opened up. At the very beginning of tuning up an orchestra, what the clarinet or oboe player is tuning to, or the flute, is his whole instrument at one time. He's pushing in or pulling out the mouthpiece to get it to that A. Once he's done that, he has tuned every note in his instrument. If he pulls it out more and it's a longer column of air, it's flat. The note is flat compared to the concertmaster's A. If he pushes it in too far, it's sharp. But the column of air has that vibration, and it may also even have overtones. It's possible that the column of air is also vibrating with fractions of it. Speaking of fractions, I showed you that that there's a mathematical relationship between notes of the octave, 110, 220, etc. It's not just doubling or halving. The threes and the fives and the sevens also have their own fractions that are going. The other thing is, this is not unique to sound. The reason that the cartoon of the physicist on the blackboard has him covering the blackboard with mathematical relationships is that physics, the reality of crystals or molecules or what have you, frequently follow mathematical rules. When Einstein says, I can't believe that God is playing dice with the universe, he's not talking about his conception of God. In fact, Einstein was probably an agnostic or an atheist, Jewish, but secular Jewish. What he was saying is that there's a fundamental order to the way things work with gravity or magnetism or sound waves or what have you. And he was opposing it to quantum mechanics, which is these little bursts of particles or waves that are coming out in more arbitrary manner or more chaotic manner. Einstein's view is that there's almost always a mathematical relationship, and it just depends upon us to see what it is. I'm not backing him. I think that there's a lot of evidence that says that quantum mechanics is real and that there's disorder as well. But I'm just saying that within physics there are many mathematical things in addition to just sound waves. Yes?
Many of the classical composers wrote for concert halls, it seems, or maybe even salons. But a lot of us get our musical exposures through the movies. And I wondered if there's a different type of demand on a composer for writing for one type of audience versus another. I think of people like a movie like 2001, but I think that was Strauss, that theme went right through it just transported the viewer. Or John Williams writing for Star Wars. Do you feel that there's a difference in the type of requirements or demands on the composer?
Yes and no. 2001, for instance, used the Blue Danube Waltz, which was written for the concert of the band hall, and also used Gustav Holst's The Planets. I forget which planet, but you know, it was classical music. So you can use music composed for the concert hall or the chamber music group for your basic musical arrangements within the movie. And music directors often do. They'll bring in classical music. They may rearrange it or rescore it or what have you. I think for movie composers, they want to do two things. They want to compose for an emotional state, quite specific, you know, and they may actually view the movie without the score before they decide what to do. And they want to also give you a theme for an individual character. It's like opera. You either bring in the theme music for that particular character or you bring in the movie music. So let's say for Chariots of Fire. You know, at times you want to bring in, and this is written specifically for this music, for this movie. It's a sort of surge of build-up, of excitement, you know, with the race or the events commemorating it or the congratulations or what have you. So Vangelos really composes it just to bring, and the music adds a lot. Without it, it's a fairly flat, well, not exceptionally flat, but it's not Chariots of Fire. With the music, you just walk out of that movie and you're ready for bear.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but in appreciation of coming here, I'd like to present you the DMA